Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible, the Special Needs Survival Podcast. And I'm here today with Christina, who is here to talk to us about BILT. That's BILT, and it's bridging. I stumbled over this when I was practicing earlier. Bridging Independent Living Together, Inc. Oh my gosh, that's a mouthful. It's a great program. It's a great organization with a bunch of unique programs, I should say. And I'm really excited to have you on the show. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So, and her name is so melodic, Christina Gravina. I love it. So Christina's CEO of BILT and also a BCBA. So we're going to heavy focus on some of that. But Christina, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and how did you end up in this field?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started in this field working at summer camps for children with disabilities,
Wow.
which then led me to working in adult group homes for people with disabilities. And that really sparked my interest in ABA, in adult services, and independent living in general. So I went to school originally to be a teacher, and I quickly realized that I loved working with adults more than children, and that my heart really was in line with the teen and adult population. So from there, I focused really on ABA for teens and adults. And when I started in the field, this wasn't a big thing whatsoever. Everyone thought that ABA was only for people up to maybe 6 to 8 years old. So it was
Right.
kind of a newer idea of using ABA in this way.
Mhm.
And from there, I started, BILT. I finished my BCBA, and then now we're 5 years in.
Wow. And why start your own organization? Why not work through other places and spaces that are already out there?
Sure. So, I ask myself this question a lot sometimes when it's a tough week, but the real reason is that I worked for many organizations where I felt that they did an all right job in what they were doing, but I felt that really and truly there needed to be more individualized services, and there needed to be people that are listening to parents. There needed to be people that are willing to fight against one size fit all sort of services.
Mm,
And many people and many organizations I talked to, when I would be asking the dreaded question of why are things like this? Why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? I was just basically told, oh, there are boxes, you have to fit into a box. And I've never really fit into boxes well in general. So I kind of figured, why don't I just start my own company? We'll see how it goes. But a lot of people I talk to have similar ideas that I do that are parents. So we'll just try our best. And it was very successful. And then from there, we just kind of have kept organically growing and expanding.
that's awesome. I am so hugely in favor of community, and you are growing this as a community.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I know that getting services for adults, I know firsthand, is so challenging. And BCBA for adults is really challenging, trying to get it paid for. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, about approaching insurance providers and other organizations with this idea that adults with autism need to continue their BCBA supports?
Sure. So in Massachusetts, we are making progress on this exact topic. So
Yeah.
private insurances, in Mass at least, have decided that they will allow ABA to go for longer than 22. Sometimes it's throughout life, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is great. And sometimes people will say till 26 or 28, depending on the insurance. This is still, it's progress, but it's not ideal because the big one we really need to tackle is Mass Health, who covers mostly adults. when they age out of the system in covering ABA. Because right now with Mass Health, they'll kick you off at 22 and there is no appealing it, but there has been progress because Pennsylvania recently, their sort of Medicaid system have allowed for ABA through for adults. And so it's hard because you have to advocate for these services. The state, and we do have a state contract, will allow for ABA services. It's not the same as insurance. They're not going to cover the same amount as insurance, and it's not the same makeup, but they do have an avenue to pay for that. It's called the 3710 clinical contract. That's the one that we have. But in general, it's really difficult because it's explaining to these, funding sources that autism does not stop at 22. And in fact, this is the time of their life where they really need services more than anything, because our ABA we're focusing on them learning to ride a train and learning how to cook and learning how to live independently. It's not tabletop activities. So having funding sources sort of understand that, like right now, we need to push them to be adulthood, and they've had all these services up until now, but we can't let them just regress and go back to not having any skills.
Right. It's like saying that, oh, once you hit 22, you have no more growth left in you, which we know is ridiculous because we as adults are always growing and learning and having new experiences, having new challenges, trying new things. It makes zero sense to not allow the support model that is effective for many people on the spectrum to continue throughout their life. And not everybody transitions into adult living at 22. We're on all different transition and growth, trajectories. So I never could understand the decision behind it other than, of course, bean counting the numbers, right? But but there's never been a good explanation, to my knowledge, from our state Medicaid agency, Mass Health, about why this has to just fall off the cliff at age 22.
It's very strange because when you look at other medical services they cover dentists throughout people's life, they cover doctors throughout people's life, and ABA is a therapy. So you would think that they would cover this throughout life unless the person graduates from the therapy or no longer needs the therapy, which some people do graduate, and that's awesome. But given the information we know now that the human brain really doesn't even fully develop till 25 for everybody, that number of 22 is, to me, pretty, I have a lot of question marks around that too. Like, where did this come from?
Such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah. And we are just scratching the surface on understanding autism and the human brain and neurodiversity. I mean, just scratching the surface. So we really need to keep an open mind when it comes to services. And the same as you, I look at it like if somebody needs speech therapy or physical therapy or occupational therapy, and you have a provider that can justify it to the insurance company, whether it's a state insurance, a federal insurance, or a private insurer, it should be the same. If somebody needs PT ongoing because they have mobility challenges, why would you not be able to continue the ABA when somebody has, challenges in that realm of their life? Just, I don't get it.
When
So
you look at it, it's actually discriminatory because they're discriminating due to age. So that I'm part of a couple different groups that are trying really hard to get this changed, and that's really the hill that we're gonna die on, is that this is discriminatory. It's wrong. You're telling people that because they have reached a certain age that you are deciding as the insurance funding source that what's best for them compared to what their doctors or board certified behavior analyst is saying that they need.
So given that they're not paying attention to the clinicians and the research, you mentioned Pennsylvania, and I know in Massachusetts, so we're trying to get a law passed here about this very thing, going past age 22. What other states do you know of that have been successful at challenging this idea that adults don't need ABA?
I have not heard of other states that
Okay.
have any success with this at this time, but I know nationwide there is really a push to say,
Mhm.
what are we doing, and to kind of revamp the Medicaid system in general for ABA. So I'm hoping that the more states that this is becoming a really big issue, especially as there's a lack of programming sort of across the board and
Right.
high quality programming at that, people that aren't interested in traditional sort of day hab models. I'm hoping that more states will come together to make more of a national push for it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, agreed. Well, tell us a little bit more about your unique programs that you have with this very individualized or person-centered focus. Anybody that's listened to me for like 5 seconds knows how committed I am to a person-centered process and a person-centered plan. Um, but that can be hard to do institutionally. So I applaud you and audience. The reason that I have people like Christina come on the show is so that you can get some ideas about creative solutions to our problems and what we need in the disability community. So Christina's taken, a void and is filling it with some unique programming. So tell us a little bit more about your unique programs for teenagers and young adults.
Sure, yeah. So we started with just doing one-to-one services with people. And the way that looks is from the beginning, I was really committed to the idea of when I see parents, I see them having to become their own HR team for their kids. I see them having to become the recreation coordinator. I see them having to fill all these roles besides for just mom or dad, which can sometimes make their relationship with their own children pretty strained because they
Yeah.
have to do all of these jobs. So the one-to-one services, we try very hard we find, hire, and schedule the staff. We don't want the family to be stressed about that.
Yeah.
We set up a team of backups that we train to have them come in if somebody leaves to, again,
Yep.
try to alleviate stress. The programs, they are not all ABA based. Some of them are just therapeutic mentors or skill building. And we have a goal of community integration and independent living skills and that depends on the person on what that's going to look like. Because
Mhm.
for some people, that could be more independence in the bathroom. For other people, that could be actually getting a job. So
Right.
we meet with the family and the individual before we start services to talk about the goals and what they really want for their outcomes of service. Sometimes goals could even be simple as like they just need a break from each other and they just want their child to do something besides electronics, which
Yeah.
that's an okay goal too. Sometimes they're much more complex. So that's one service we do. We do that. Our youngest is 4, our oldest is in their 60s, and we get paid through basically private pay. Some school districts pay for us. We also we have DDS that pays for one-to-one services for people over 22, although that's not always easy to secure depending on who you're talking to.
Right.
Um, and we also work with insurance if people have the need for ABA. Then recently, as of June, we opened a brick and mortar center, our first brick and mortar center. And this has really been something that I have been planning for years and that I always have kind of dreamed about wanting.
Mhm.
And this is where we do small group classes with very high staff ratios. And it is not a day program. People don't have to come every day, and the times are not always lining up with daytime hours. But the whole point of our small group classes is that people that maybe they don't want a full-time program or it's not appropriate for them, they can literally pick and choose their classes for the month, almost like you would for a college, or if you were going to go on your own in the community and do what you wanted to do at like a yoga class or horseback riding. So today they did a theater and games group. Now they have a showcase cinema movie group where they're going out. Monday they're doing yoga, then they do art class. So it works where people can pick and choose what they want. They don't have to come every day. They can do this if they have a day program and come after. They can do this instead of a day program. They can do this and work. So a lot of our people they weren't appropriate for a traditional day program, they weren't interested in it, or they wanted something a little bit different, because our classes are also run by clinicians, and our ratio is typically one staff to two individuals, but we do accept individuals that have a one-to-one. That one-to-one can be a BILT one-to-one, it can be a parent, it could be a guardian, it could be a sibling. So we're very flexible we want everyone to be comfortable. And the main point is that they're doing things that are not board games, sitting around and coloring,
Right.
unless that's the group that they choose and they want to do that.
Right, right. I know we do have a one size fits all. When you said that right at the beginning of the interview, I totally resonated with that because I've sat in many a meeting doing somebody's service plan where it's like, well, we have these three things that we do with everybody. You can have, this type of job, you can do this type of activity, like they send everybody to the Y. Oh, we need a Y membership. We're going to take everybody to the Y. Well, some people don't want to go to the Y. Some people don't want to go in the pool. Some people don't want to exercise. Like maybe, somebody prefers, and I have someone who does this who won't go into the Y because it's way too noisy and bright, but they love to go for long walks. Well, that is very stressing on the staffing schedule, right?
Yes.
Because they can't take you out for an hour and a half walk. But as a person with autism, this is what he wants to do with his day, like virtually every day, even when it's cold, raining, whatever. Um, but it fits into what he needs for his body and his mind, right? So it's so frustrating having to conform to, what we offer is X, Y, or Z when you want H.
Exactly. And that's why I really started BILT, was that I kept finding, all these individuals that slipped through the cracks that really didn't want these boxed options that they have
Mm-hmm.
for them. And many of our individuals also have what's called self-directed funding in mass. So
Right.
this means that their parents have now taken the brunt of trying to find a staff for them if they can find a staff for them.
Yeah.
But even if they did find a staff for them, self-directed is a great program in theory, but in actuality, to have just one staff with the individual all day sitting at home with mom now being the recreation department again is
Yeah.
really difficult. So by at least having small groups classes, people can pick and choose to come either with their staff or without their staff. And this allows for people to have a meaningful life, but also, like you're talking about, an individual that likes to walk. We have a walking club. I always tell people from the beginning, like, I don't want people at these classes that aren't interested in the topic at all. If people hate the horse farm, I don't want them going to the horse volunteering group. They should be doing what they like, because this isn't about we want to force people to do things just to get them out of the house for the day. This
Yeah.
is, if they don't like the group, we can work on getting a one-to-one staff so they can do their own thing during that time. They don't have to come to the group.
Interesting. How many people do you serve now in your brick and mortar?
In the brick and mortar, we serve around 45, give or take, every month,
Mhm.
depending on what they want. In total, we have around 150 clients.
So, how do you deal with the problem that everybody's having, which is getting good qualified staff?
It's challenging, but how we handle it is we pay people well. So usually for direct care work, people get paid around 20 an hour. We usually start at 23 an hour. We also provide benefits for people. We provide benefits for even part-time staff because we appreciate what they do and we want them to be engaged with the services. We
Sure.
also offer ongoing professional development that we pay for, as well as supervised experience hours for people that are becoming licensed. And then we spend a whole lot of time doing staff appreciation nights and staff appreciation fundraisers. So, for example, this past week, we took the staff out bowling. We bought everybody's first round who is, of legal drinking age. We bought pizza. We gave everyone gift cards as a way to say thank you. So we try to do this once or twice a year, and it really goes a long way with showing people that, one, we understand they're adults and that there's many different jobs, and two, we really appreciate that they're here and choose that they're going to have their job with us.
Hmm. That's really nice. And it makes a difference. People feel really connected and committed to their organization when you bring people together in that way. That's great. So, what type of person do you serve?
So we serve really a whole array of people. We have
Mhm.
many individuals with autism. We have many that are developmentally disabled. We have people with cerebral palsy. So our essential, what the type of people we really can't serve are people that may have aggressive tendencies that require two people to manage or physical restraints. And the
Mhm.
reason really why is because all of the funding sources we talked about earlier, they are not going to provide two staff for one individuals for funding services. So this makes it so that it would be unsafe for both the individual and the staff to be working if someone required that level of intensive care. However, many of our individuals, they do have seizure disorders. They do have more specifics that people need to be trained in. We have a nurse that does training on these sort of more medical conditions. So usually I tell people that there's very few people we can't serve. We try our best, but if it comes to the point where it's a safety hazard or a safety risk, that's really where we have that conversation to say, look, maybe we need to give you a referral elsewhere, just because we're always thinking about safety first.
That's awesome. Okay. So, congrats on getting all of this pulled together. What I want to transition to now in our conversation, because you're such a good partner for families, for parents, siblings, care providers, what are some key tips and strategies for advocating for the right program for your person?
Definitely some key tips I would say are going to look at certain programs and asking questions, even if you feel that you're being, quote unquote, annoying. I have a lot of families who will say things like, oh, I'm afraid if I speak out or that I don't, like this, that are they not going to give me as much funding or are they not going to help me out? And I always tell them that's illegal. They can't do that.
Right.
So asking questions, also seeing how people are treated places and listening to your individual if they're in a place about what their thoughts and comments are. I
Mhm.
can go into a program and if I hear, a staff at a day program I'm observing at telling an individual off, how many times a day do I have to tell you to not do this or things like
Mhm.
that? To me, that immediately raises a red flag because it seems one, the staff is quite irritable. So is this a training issue? Is this
Yeah,
are they tired? Are they working 72 hours a week so they just don't have patience?
right.
It seems there needs to be something else going on here. I would also say that advocating to the funding sources and letting them know about what the limitations are, because this is a
Mhm.
problem too, is that people might get into a day program or a group home and the funding sources think everything is wonderful, but it's not
Mhm.
wonderful. And the parents have this fear that I can't speak out about what might be wrong,
Right.
but you have to speak out about what's wrong because this is literally your child's life. So if you don't if you don't speak for them, who's going to speak for them?
Definitely. All right. My last question. For those of you listening out there who might be feeling adventurous and might want to, start down this path of creating a new organization or a new program, I know, Christina, that you have good tips about what not to do and what works, right? So, for anybody listening who doesn't have this ideal type of program, near them, how can somebody get started on creating something that's meaningful for their person and maybe others as well?
I think the first thing is to start small. When we started, it was only me and one other person and two individuals, and that was okay because it was sort of the basis of starting, figuring things out. It's a lot
Yeah,
easier to make mistakes with two people than it is for 10, 20, 30. So that was
right.
really helpful. I think it's also important to get feedback from people that are interested in your services or might have, kids with disabilities and get
Mhm.
their sort of ideas of what they want. Because often when we are trying a new group, I ask the parents, what is it that you want to see that you haven't been seeing? Because I don't know what they want. So by getting their input, then I can design something. And I always say it could be a great failure, or it could be a great success, but we don't really know until we try it. I would
Yeah.
also say that, especially dealing with big funding sources, to not get discouraged. I was turned down from DDS, I think twice before they accepted our contract. And it can be very discouraging because you put in all of this work and time and, you're really trying to help people and they don't really tell you a whole lot of information about what the problem is. So it
Right.
can be very disheartening, but just trying to go back, look at the contractual information, reword a word if that's what they want, even though you might think it's silly, and just submitting it again, just for the greater good to get this in place.
Yeah.
And it is really important.
That makes total sense. I love this. So, for the audience, if you would like to get in touch with Christina, we're going to have all of her contact information in the show notes. And we're super excited that you were able to be with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your successes. I know you've got failures, we all have them, but this is a success and taking a really beautiful person-centered approach and meeting individuals, where they are and letting them explore and enjoy their life in a meaningful way. It's so important. It should be so natural, but we struggle as a community to do this. So it's just really wonderful to see that you've been able to bring this along and meet the needs of so many people. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me.